Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell.
All right, it's time once again for Music Night at the Majestic, and with us tonight, John Nixon of Page 99. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you. This is going to be good. This is going to be fun.
Well, I hope you're right. I hope you feel that way when all is said and done.
Depends what you ask me.
If a train leaves New York.
Right.
Well, I'll tell you, on the show, we always usually start from the standpoint of every musician's journey starts somewhere. Where was that somewhere for you?
That journey probably started in the basement of my parents' house when I was maybe 11, 12 years old. My older brother was in a band. They used to rehearse at our house, which meant all the gear was there from the older guy's band. And I used to love to sit down on that drummer's drum kit and just try to figure stuff out. I had everything backwards because I'm left-handed. I lead with my left hand, and so I'm playing a right-handed drum kit. I had no instruction. I just kind of had a basic understanding of what to hit when. That turned into me building a mixtape, putting on headphones to some of my favorite songs back then, and just trying to play along and copy what they were doing. And it grew out from there, but that was the original starting point, was secretively stealing time on another drummer's kit.
Tell me this, what were some of the songs that were on that mixtape that you taught yourself how to play to?
Oh, I still remember that because I went and rebuilt that playlist to a certain degree on Spotify. It was really I would play through whole albums, but eventually I built a mixtape. So the debut Boston album was a big one. I took on some difficult stuff that I didn't know how difficult it was at the time. I just tried to play what it was, and that was some Kansas stuff. Like I'd play Point of No Return, Carry On My Wayward Son. I played along a lot with Neil Diamond. My dad had a lot of Neil Diamond records, and I loved the Beautiful Noise album. There's a lot of nice, big, heavy drumming on that record. Those are the ones that come to mind immediately.
Yeah. And tell me this, did that put you on the course of being a big record buyer as a kid?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I was one of those kids that I didn't really want to work. I didn't like working as a kid. I didn't like mowing lawns. I didn't like doing delivering newspapers. But, I worked out the math in my head. What did I have to do on a weekly basis to have $5 and change at the end of the week? Because there was a record store in a grocery store. There was a grocery line called Chatham around here, and they had stores called Chatham Plus, which were precursors to Meijer, meaning they had all these other departments beyond a grocery store. And they had an incredible record room. They had it soundproof. They had like the cashier thing elevated like a DJ booth, and he would play records, and they had just a great selection. We couldn't believe it in a grocery store. So every week I'd ride my bike there. It was about 1.5 miles and come home with a record.
Do you remember what the very first one you bought with that hard-earned money?
It was the Boston album, and I bought it purely on the cover. It was up on the wall, and I saw that cover art, and I said, that's got to be great music. And so I asked the guy, is this album any good? And he said, yeah, it's pretty good. I took it home, and I still listen to that, and there's moments in it that still feel fresh to me. I can still listen to the guitar outro of Hitch a Ride and hear those the two parts playing off each other, and I still get a charge out of it.
Absolutely. And what were some of the other records you remember riding your bike down there to get?
Well, I remember Ariel Speedwagon's live record, the one You Get What You Play For. For some reason, I wanted that one. I don't remember what I was hearing. I could have been Riding the Storm Out. Could have been Keep Pushing. Eagles Hotel California was another one that I bought there, I believe. It's a little confusing because I had an older brother who's only a year older than me, and he used to buy records and bring them in the house too. And I can't remember who bought which all the time. He was big into some of the more progressive stuff, so he brought Yes into the house. And at one point I did the Columbia House, buy X amount of records, and then you had to, do the commitment. Off of that, I remember getting, this would have been like at the very beginning of me collecting records. Beach Boys' Endless Summer would have been one of those. Bachman Turner Overdrive Best Of was in that group. I can still picture those. I think the Monkees, More of the Monkees was in there. That's about all I can picture at the moment. But that was, I was born in 65, so I started discovering music around 76, 77.
Tell me this, John. The records you mentioned so far, all in that, pop rock vein.
Yeah.
What was the first album that you got that was kind of a left field choice, if you will, that deviated from all those bands that you mentioned?
There was a guy in high school that we used to hang out with because he had a car. We didn't have a car yet, and he had a car. So we could kind of sneak out of school at lunch and go over to the mall and hit the pretzel shop, or after school we'd drive to the arcade. But he was the first one that introduced us to this thing that had a sound I'd never heard before. I'm like, whoa, this is way out there for me at the time. And he said, yeah, this guy's the next big thing. You're going to love this. And he was playing Prince Controversy album. And I could not understand what was going on musically. It was so new to me. But I would just absolutely grew to love it. So that meant, by now we're in the 80s. So, I haven't deviated much in my first 5 years. But then I bought 1999 when that came out. And that would probably be the most one that deviated the most. When I was younger, my dad influenced our music a lot. He was a big jazz listener. So he, had things like Chuck Mangione, Dave Brubeck, Miles Davis. And I would listen to a lot of those. I may have bought a Mangione record or a Maynard Ferguson record in that time. I don't remember, but we did have them. So I was a little bit diverse at the time, but the first thing I bought that went completely out of what I thought my wheelhouse would have been that Prince 1999.
Yeah. Well, in the Page 99 music, you can hear some of those grooves, because Mangione frequently had a good groove to what he did. And you can kind of hear that influence in what you're currently doing.
Yeah, I think I listened to probably the Feel So Good album, the live album that he did, which is amazing. It's one of the greatest live albums I've ever heard.
The Hollywood Bowl album?
Hollywood Bowl album. And then, I bought that record, and you open that up, and it's got the whole book inside of all the pictures and the explaining of how the arrangements were done, and just loaded with pictures. Packaging was amazing. The music was amazing. I listened to that a lot. But in terms of like groove stuff, some of the Page 99 stuff here, a lot of that grew out of a recent discovery that I had of this whole yacht rock movement and what it meant, and diving into the study of what that meant, and discovering artists or rediscovering artists in a different context that I probably missed the first time around. Because if I get to about the year 2018 or so, I was at a point where I just wasn't finding any new music that I liked. Occasional album, occasional few songs, but nothing that gave me that feeling of music back then. And also being a recording engineer, I know a lot of the tricks that are done today, and I know how much more difficult it was to do stuff back then. So I have that in the back of my mind, and I'm impressed by that. So I gravitated back to the older music and said, you know what, I'm more likely to find something I like from, say, 1978 that I passed over than trying to find something new. So I took a flyer at a record store one day, going through the dollar bin, and brought home some records, a whole bunch of stuff, and put on Pablo Cruz' Worlds Away album. And all of a sudden, my head just, I'm not going to say exploded. It opened up to this whole eureka moment that indeed I was right. I'm going to find more by doing this. So that got me into studying what is yacht rock. I rediscovered Steely Dan and Doobie Brothers, Michael McDonald era. and bands that like Pages that people never heard of, or Ambrosia. All of that stuff that I had missed first time around or ignored first time around was suddenly new and fresh to me, but it was done back in the day when I could hear the recording, hear the harmonies, hear the layers, and go, wow, that's amazing. There was no auto-tune, no timing fixing, nothing. They had to do that stuff and or find clever ways to, with the recording stuff, to record vocals, bounce them down, fly them back in another section. Just the creativity they had to have in the studio, or the ability to pull it off like in front of a microphone, 4 voices, just is so much more impressive than even great harmonies you can hear in 2024, because you know how it's done now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the things that we frequently talk about out here, is the fact that the difference that technology plays in it. As you just said, now you can, pull up, a feature in Pro Tools and get that effect. You go back and you listen to stuff that was recorded, Beach Boys, for example.
That was
those harmonies.
Yes.
Yeah. You listen to the Beach Boys harmonies and the way that the vocals are layered and all that, and you think about what they had to record that with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Same thing goes when you hear stuff that is so crystal clear, on it, and you think, okay, what mics did they have? What recording equipment did they have? And then as far as production goes, you didn't have, you couldn't just, okay, we're going to take this piece and drop it in here. A lot of that stuff was recorded live, which is amazing to me.
And if I hear something today that sounds fabulous, I still in the back of my head say, yeah, but, I mean, you sound like you're a great singer, but are you a great singer? And it hurts the great singers of today, because we all have that sort of, well, to what degree is it fixed, Whereas, what did I pull up recently when I was having a conversation about this? Yeah, Beach Boys, Our Prayer, which is an a cappella thing from, I think, the Smile album.
Mm-hmm.
You hear that, and it's just people gathered around a microphone. And it's unbelievable that not just the harmonies, but the intervals that Brian jumps and hits these notes, and the way lines work against each other. Like, how did you come up with this? And it's so fascinating to me.
Oh, absolutely. It's like just an extension of that. When you listen to the backing tracks that the Wrecking Crew did, to me, it's just amazing how much talent and how innovative, that group of musicians was.
Yeah, I still, point to Carol Kay as being such an innovative bass player. Hal Blaine obviously played on a zillion tracks. I've never been all that crazy about the way Hal Blaine played, but from what I understand, he was the anchor to so many of those sessions, as a sort of a mediator between the artist and the rest of the band.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a release of Pet Sounds. Is it Pet Sounds? It might even be the box set. It might be I think it's the box set, where you can hear some of the early tracks that would have been Wrecking Crew, stuff like I Get Around or Little Deuce Coupe, without any of the vocals on it. And you can really hear the nuance of what's going on in those bed tracks. It's really interesting, the bass lines, and they're doubled by guitar, and it's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me this, John.
Yep.
What was the songs or records that led you to becoming a recording engineer? There had to be something you heard and said, wow, this is really intriguing.
Yeah, and it's going to kind of come out from left field, but I remember this moment very clearly. And we had, by the time I was in high school, I had my own band, I had my own drum kit, and we were in another guy's house in his basement, and that was our hangout spot, that was our rehearsal space. But we also would go down there and just listen to records. And I think it was one of them that brought in an album called Lexicon of Love by ABC, which was produced by Trevor Horn.
Yep.
And I heard this record, And I was blown away by the detail, the use of orchestra, the use of things like glockenspiel, and the way all the parts played off against each other, and the way that the mix would change. Drum sounds would be different in the intro than in the verses. Like, what is going on here? And I remember reading on the back, produced by Trevor Horn. And before that, I didn't really know what a record producer did. I sort of, at that moment, thought, what does this mean? And I started kind of asking other people, or just kind of looking around, seeing, it's pre-internet, so I'm just trying to figure out, what does that mean? And it was explained to me that the producer of a record really equates to the director of a movie. He's ultimately the one that has to put everything together. There's times that he can be the creative force and the visionary. There's other times that he is executing maybe what a writer's idea is. But either way, he is responsible for the final outcome. And that really got me interested in what the whole recording studio process was. I wasn't a super technical guy, but anytime we did our band demos, I was always the one setting up the microphones. I was always the one kind of figuring out what the gain at each channel should be on the mixer, not knowing that I'm really recording engineering at the time. I just think, okay, I'm just using our PA to facilitate making a demo. It's not really clicking. Eventually, it clicked because I started to understand what a music producer did, and this friend that had the house where we were rehearsing went ahead of me. He went to Berklee College of Music in Boston. He was going there as a composition major. And he came back for probably Christmas break at, so it would have been like after his first semester. And we went out to dinner, and he's like, dude, this is what you need to do. You need to come here. You need to come here and try to get into the MP&E department, which was music production and engineering. So I hadn't really given it much thought, other than I kind of knew I wanted to do music. I was kind of just flailing around in college, getting good grades, but had no idea where I was going. So I did, and I went and I auditioned, and I took all the pre-tests you have to take for placement, and managed to, after my first year, you then have to submit an application to whatever major you want. And I think at the time it was like 1 out of every 5 people that applied to that production department got in. It's now like 1 out of 20. It's even more in demand. But yeah, it was a very in-demand department. And I got in, and that became my path. And there was an interesting story that happened while I was there, if you don't mind me going on. I went in as a drummer. That was my main instrument. I had played a little bit of piano when I was a kid, basic rudimentary piano lessons that your parents send you to. You go to the mall, and there's 15 other kids all trying to play hot cross buns together. But I knew a little bit. I used to sit down at the piano and noodle around. We had like a Glenn Campbell songbook. I think we had a Bob Seger songbook, and I would try to sing and play these chords, and that went by the wayside. But now here I am at Berklee College of Music in my second year as a drummer, really not interested in being a performance drummer or a studio drummer. I wanted to be in the studio as a producer or an engineer. So I ignored my lessons. I didn't really do the work on that side. Well, one day we get notifications in our mailboxes that there had been some thefts out of the drum lockers, because you'd keep your drums at the school if you lived on an off-campus apartment, so you'd have to lug them through Boston to get them. They had lockers there. Well, mine was one that was stolen. And that was a crossroads of, am I going to buy another drum kit? Do I have the money to buy another drum kit? Do I ask my parents if they have the money to buy another drum kit? They're already paying for this tuition. And that was when this friend of mine, the one that had gone ahead of me, we were roommates there, and he was a composition major, but his main instrument was piano, so he took piano lessons. And he said, you know what? You know enough about piano. Let me talk to my piano teacher to see if he will take you on as a beginner student, a rudimentary student, just to satisfy the requirement that you had to have a focused instrument while you're at Berklee. So this guy took me on. I didn't really do a whole lot in those lessons either, but it gave me the check box to say I was piano was my main instrument. Well, lo and behold, I end up spending enough time on the keyboard that's in the apartment or a piano at the school, where now I'm actually writing real songs, and I eventually became a composer, a commissioned composer for advertising, film trailer, which is what I still do on the side. But none of that could have ever happened if my drum kit had not gotten stolen in the first place.
Wow.
Yeah.
It always amazes me when there's stories, like that, if you will, where an unexpected twist that could be really bad turns out to send somebody on a different direction that they're supposed to be on, if you will.
Yeah, and in the moment, I'm just taking the next step. I'm not feeling like, oh, I'm on the right path now. No, I'm just getting up the next day and doing what's in front of me the next day. And it's not until I can look back after all this time and see that there was, divine work in my background.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, you mentioned, you're writing for film, TV, advertising, what have you. Mm-hmm. A lot of the Page 99 songs sound like they could easily be movie soundtrack songs. At least that's my take. And what I always do is when playing new music, or what's new to me, I'll play it for friends who are also music aficionados and say, give me some feedback on this. Tell me what you think. And that was one of the things that they had said. It's like, man, this sounds like this would be like fit perfectly in a movie scene. So
interesting.
Yeah.
That is interesting. I mean, we try to have our songs sort of tell a story lyrically. We don't want them so abstract that you can't understand them, but we also want them to be more than just rudimentary, so that they lead you into some sort of imaginary place. Everybody should have their own interpretation. I try to feather that area where I'm not telling you exactly what to think. I'm guiding you to an area with these lyrics and then letting you kind of finish the picture.
I'm going to take it then that you preferred in the heyday of MTV the videos that weren't a visual representation of every lyric.
I guess so. I didn't like the ones that made no sense. I couldn't understand some of the videos that had no connection to the song. That I could not understand. But but then again, I was watching something earlier today. When you see that video that Aha did with Take On Me, the comic book drawing, still one of the greatest visual projects I think ever done. And I have no idea what the budget of that was, but the quality of that 4 minutes is as good as any great movie for what they pulled off at the time.
Yeah, it was a case that was one of the ones that worked. As you said, a lot of them just to me seemed like it was, hey, we're going to be weird for the sake of being weird.
Yeah.
And others were so literal that it's like it took the imagination for the viewer out of it.
Yes. Yeah, they were. And well, you always had the performance videos too, which were kind of, they didn't look as fake to me then as they look now. I don't know if it's my that I know more, or now that I'm watching it on high fidelity as opposed to a little TV screen. But yeah, those kind of were pretty poor.
Yeah, all 240 lines of the VHS tape of the band's videos that you bought.
Is that how many it was?
Yep.
Nice.
Well, tell me this, from Berklee, what was the next step for you?
Well, I was never somebody who wanted to live in one of the quote big cities. I went to New York once. I just didn't want to live in New York. I didn't want to live in LA. I don't know. Maybe I had fear of the big pond. I don't know. But I eventually finished my schooling and then came back here to Detroit, where I was originally from. Now, Detroit has a lot of great music history, but it doesn't really have a big music production environment going on where you would, like in the 70s, say in LA, where there were studios with multiple rooms going on and people were going from room to room recording on each other's records. It's not like that. But what we did have going at the time, so this would be 1989, probably the most productive advertising business in this, outside of, say, New York. The amount of stuff that was being produced here, because we had the auto companies here. They were still here, and the bulk of advertising, the biggest advertising outside of beer commercials, was auto stuff at the time. So we were producing a lot of commercials. Where we did have a studio there, I worked at a place called Ron Rose Productions. A friend of mine heard of an opening there and a beginning slot there, and so I worked in the tape department there and eventually moved up into a studio. But we produced so much advertising. It was unbelievable. I think we had like 12 studios, and they would be booked all day, every day, and sometimes into the night. And just unbelievable amounts of advertising, which now that industry is almost completely gone. But it was there. It was peaking at the time that I was there. And another guy who was working at the same company was starting to write music for commission for people that were hiring him to write. And he happened to be an ex-Berklee guy. He only did one semester there in the 1986. So we overlapped a little bit but didn't know each other. But he knew enough about what Berklee taught, and he was fascinated enough with me that we kind of hit it off, and he kept tabs on me. And when his business to write music for other people grew to a point where he could staff up, he eventually started his own business and then staffed up. He brought me on, and that would have been in the early 90s. And I told him, I don't know anything about writing music for this kind of stuff. And he said, it doesn't matter. You know music. I'll teach you how to use that. And that got me going in that.
What is one or the two things working in that very fast-paced environment where you've got to cram a lot into a little bit of time that you learned there or in that time period?
I learned the thing that is still my favorite thing today, and it will tie back to our conversation about making music in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, is that, and this ties into the Pro Tools thing, because we were under, like you say, a quick timeline, you had to make decisions quickly and make confident decisions that you were then going to build on. You had to decide, okay, this is the tempo map I am going to use. And now I have to agree with myself that that's locked and go on to the next thing. Okay, I know there's need to be hits here, here, here. We need a break here because there's a joke that ends this spot. We want to open up a spot there. And then we got the company logo at the end that we need to highlight. So we know we have this framework and we agree, okay, that hit here, space there, and here. Those things get locked, then you move on to the next thing. And the ability to make those decisions and stay true to them is the way that they had to make music back then, because when they were recording, they had to decide, what is the bass sound going to sound like, or what are the drums going to sound like? It's not, okay, we'll just record everything flat and we can fix it in the mix. That was not done back then. It could not be done back then because there was not enough tracks. There was not enough gear in the studios. You couldn't decide which of the 7 or 8 reverbs you're going to use that your Pro Tools rig will run. You've got 1 or 2 in the room, and one is maybe high quality and the other one's maybe consumer level quality. And you have to decide, how am I going to use these things? You make these decisions. Sometimes you put chorus and compression on the bass as it's recorded to tape, and you decide, it's locked, let's move on. And you have to make these quick decisions. And I still work that way today because I believe that making those decisions and saying this stuff is locked allows the next musician to come in, and that next musician might even be you or yourself playing a different instrument. But whatever it is, the musician has to be able to respond to what they're hearing and play to what they're hearing, whether it's a sax line or a guitar part. If everything is left to be flexible and changeable right up to the end, nobody can come in and commit to any part. They're just laying down something that's kind of safe and kind of going to work, and it's okay. Let the mixer figure it out. Since when is the mixer the guy that's going to figure out how our songs should sound? So that I still, even though I have the ability to do everything that Pro Tools can do, I still conduct my writing and my arranging in the commitment way that I would have done it in 1978.
Which is ironic that that's how the formation was, and then you wind up doing music that sounds like it could have been on the radio in 1978.
Yeah, it's kind of the stuff I always wanted to do, I think. I learned coming up studying that stuff, and yet I went to like Berklee. I was there 85 to 89. By the 90s, so much changed, and then we were into various forms of digital recording and workstations that eventually led us to Pro Tools. I never really got the opportunity in a professional or a musically mature place to make the kind of music that I wanted to make. I'm finally there now where I have access to the instrumentation that I want, but I also understand how to put things together now, and I can make what I always wanted to do. I missed that era by about 10 years. Like, now's my chance.
Since we're mentioned, page 99, obviously, what led to the formation of the band?
It's funny. I was just talking to Russ Fitzpatrick, who is our main backup vocalist. He does all the vocal arranging. We call him the Michael McDonald of the group because that is his forte. That's where his interest lies. And we were trying to pinpoint that yesterday, and we think it started probably maybe 2016, 17. He started wanting to make every year a Christmas song of people that worked at that facility where I was. And he would bring a song in, and we would make it. And then the next year came around, we make another one. Then we thought, this stuff is sounding pretty good. We did a version of This Christmas that kind of sounded a little yacht rocky, and we thought, it's kind of cool. Let's maybe write some originals towards this. And it was directed at more like 60s R&B. It was probably more in the style of saying Al Green kind of sound. And because one of the other writers in there, he's a little older, and that was where his interest lies. And he was the one that was sort of the captain of that ship, so to speak. But Russ and I kept bringing in either sounds or ideas that didn't quite fit with that because both of our interest is a little bit later in the Steely Dan era. So we thought, you know what, instead of butting heads and fighting, instead of trying to force this into that other thing, let's just create a new thing. And he says that it was like no more than a couple days after that I came down to his studio and said, "Hey, dude, I want to play you something. You tell me what you think." And I had the entire bed structure, drums, bass, and piano of Sunrise on the Water to play for him. And I said, "What do you think about something like this?" And he's like, yes, because he could hear all of his favorite bands, because he was really into that, Michael Franks and all of that kind of stuff. He's like, this is it. So yeah.
Well, Sunrise on the Water, that was from the first Page 99 album that came out, was it February 21?
Sounds about right. I don't have it in front of me, but that was the first song that we actually put together. And I asked him in the meantime, I said, well, if you wanted to do a cover in this genre, what would you want to do? And he immediately, he knew, he said, the one song that is my favorite song to always want to sing along with is Leah from Toto. So that immediately became the first cover that we did as well.
Yeah. Well, the on that album, Nothing You Can Do About It Now. Yeah. The horn arrangement's got a very Jimmy Pankow vibe to it, which being a fan of his, I thought was a nice touch.
Yeah, Pankow, and because I really pushed I love the trombone front kind of mix of brass sometimes, but also can't overlook Jerry Hay and Chuck Finley and that horn section that did a lot of those Yacht Rock records. That's hard to say. And I had all of that because I'm a huge Chicago fan. So I grew up big time. Chicago 2 would have been one of those records I probably bought early on, or my brother did. But Pankow's stuff and the Jerry Hay stuff were kind of always in the back of my mind, those guys. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, as I mentioned, y'all have friends listen to new music when I find it, and the fifth track on there, Finally Been Forgetting. My one friend, his take's like, man, this song is like Chicago meets Hall & Oates.
I'll take that.
And
Absolutely, yeah.
So that was he was picked up on that vibe too. So
yeah, a little bit of the they would have called it blue-eyed soul back in the day, I suppose. Yeah, nice. I like that.
I'll let him know.
Yeah, I was gonna say I wasn't thinking that, but that I was just thinking of the tune. But yeah, I mean it's got the halftime shuffle, so maybe I was thinking some Steely Dan stuff in there too. But I'm not as quirky or sophisticated probably as Steely Dan, so I might in my mind I think that's what I'm doing, but I don't think that it's always perceived that way by other people. So it's interesting to hear how other people take it. I like that.
Well, Sunrise on the Water's kind of got a little, a bit of an Asia vibe to it.
Yes. Kind of like what would that be like? Maybe similar to Black Cow, or even like Babylon Sisters, which was on Gaucho. Has that vibe.
The follow up?
Yep.
Yeah. Now it was just a few months later you released For Imagination's Sake.
Well, it was almost a year later, or it might have been a year later. Yeah. Okay.
Now, you had Bill Champlin on that.
Yeah.
How did you manage to get Bill?
I heard that song and wanted to cover it, heard a way to rearrange it. I thought it was a great composition, but from a production standpoint, it just never quite got over the hump. Had to double the chorus because the choruses on the original were half of what I have. And I thought, wow, you get to the chorus and 4 bars later, you're done. Like, come on now. So I had the idea of doing it. And I think I may have, I came up with this idea where I wanted to get somebody from that era potentially to play on it. And I was willing to pay somebody. And I think I may have beer texted Jay Graydon to see if he would play a guitar solo on it. And he quoted me a price. And I was like, oh, really? Okay.
I'm willing to pay, but not that much.
I also think the price indicated I don't want to do it. I don't know. You know what I mean? Certain prices are intentionally high. So I think I then beer texted, not texted, but messaged on Facebook, Bill Champlin. And it was his wife that actually runs the account, Tamara. And she said, I'll put this by Bill, but direct message me your email so we can get back to you. So I did and waited. And like 5 days later, finally, Bill said he was interested in doing it. And I told him, I said, I don't want you to do anything different from what you did then either. So I want you to do it the way you did it then. This is not a reimagining. This is meant to take something that people missed and maybe highlighting it a little bit, rearranging it, but I want you to be you. And he agreed and did it. And actually, he did backups too. He gave me his lead, doubles on the chorus, plus a first harmony, and then Tamara did the upper harmony, and that was doubled. So they sent me like 8 tracks. It was great.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you did a remix of that too with an 80s vibe, correct?
Yeah.
What was the inspiration there?
The record label that handles my releases out of Japan they'd like to have a bonus track. And I'm thinking, well, what can I do for a bonus track? On the first album, I had created an acoustic version of Leah, where I stripped it down, and the guy who played the guitars came back in and played like a finger-picked acoustic guitar part to kind of replace the stuff I had taken out. So that became the bonus track the first time around. So now they're expecting a bonus track the second time around. And I was probably working on some other project. I've always loved the 80s sounds, particularly the drum sounds, the drumulator and the Linn drum and the LM1 and the DMX and all those synths. I mean, I got, you can't see them here. I got a Juno 106 here, a JX8P there. I just love that stuff. And I thought, you know what? They're not picky about what the bonus track is. They just want something different and unique. I said, so I'm just going to take the vocal and start over with, pull up the LM1 drum sounds and my reverbs, my 480L, VST emulation, all that stuff, and just said, this is going to be pure 80s. So that's why it's called the Pure 80s Mix.
Yeah.
It was
that's
fun
cool.
to do. It was really fun, especially when the Simmons drums come in with this big drum fill in the middle. Like, just cracks me up because it's done so tongue in cheek, you know?
Yeah. Now, did you send that version to Bill to get his take on it?
No. Yeah. I was debating whether I even needed to ask permission. I don't think I needed to, but I think he would have appreciated it. But if that had been the only version, he would not have been happy.
Right.
Since it was the alternate version, I think he would have gotten a laugh out of it. He has a great sense of humor. He really does. He is hysterical.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So remember when Johnny Cola was out, he was talking about, because Johnny and Bill grew up around the same area.
Yeah.
And back then it was
Johnny Cola, man. I wish I could talk to him. I love his.
He's a really nice guy.
Wow.
It's just tons of stories. But he was talking about how he would go see Bill in the Sons of Champlin.
Oh yeah.
And because they were,
came from. Yep.
Yeah, the cool group of in that area back then. So,
did you know the original version? Were you Sons of Champlin fan? Did you know it?
Yeah, I know some, but I mean, it's not like I'm not a collector.
Yeah,
of it.
I'm trying to think of the songwriter's name because Bill didn't write it. Bill, that's another thing. Bill was miscredited as having written it on the original 45. But it was a friend of his from high school that was also wrote for Sons of Champlin, and I actually talked to that guy on the phone because he, I wanted to thank him for, writing the song. I didn't need to get his permission, but I wanted to get the nod from him, and he liked it. He actually had a third verse that he had written. He always felt like he never completed the storyline, and there's a third verse. But by the time I had a chance to talk to him, Bill had already sent me the tracks. It's like, because the way it goes is it's first verse, second verse, and then after the solos, we modulate up a half step, and he re-sings the first verse. And that was where the guy said, well, I'd written a third verse there. I wish you could have used it. Well, oh, well.
Had we known.
Had I known, yeah.
Well, taking a step back from the 80s mix, the track Can't Stop off of that album has got a, very much a summer of 78, 79 kind of vibe to it where, the AM radio would have been playing that track.
Yeah, I was thinking along the lines of some of the Doobie Brothers stuff, but also like Robbie Dupree's Steal Away. I think that's kind of what I was going for. I kind of wanted to amp it up a bit, which is why later on we have the ripping guitar solo from the Swedish superstar Peter Fristedt, who agreed to play on it. And now he also is in a band with Champlin currently right now, which is kind of interesting. Him and Champlin and Joe Williams and Tamara do a thing called CWF, which is a great project. But he is a superstar over in Sweden, and he just, he and I have been talking about trying to write together. It's just, it's difficult when we're on two different continents. We haven't figured out how to make that work, but he heard that song and just loved it, and he still raves about it. So yeah, that was one that was specifically written with the idea of sounding like exactly what you said, maybe the late days of AM radio, early days of FM.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that album was from 22. Last May,
right,
you released 99.3 FM.
Yes.
With each of the albums, where do you see the progression for you as far as the developing of the sound, the songwriting, what have you?
That is obviously very intentional. I've always liked artists that do something different with each album. I like that, they were forced to at the time, because at the time technology was changing and sounds were changing and they had to keep up. I don't know that it was always an intentional thing, but I think of artists like, I'm a big fan of Rick Springfield, and every single one of his records is distinctly different sonically. I was listening to some Adamant this morning, another one. Every single album has a completely different approach. He had, different clothing. He presented himself a different way each time as well. I think you could say that about Duran Duran after the first two. You hear them changing. And so I want to do something different with each album. And I sit down with myself, sit across from myself, and say, what are we going to do? I want to have a different textural sound with each album. So the first two are probably somewhat similar. The first album I was kind of going for 1976, and so I would use instruments that were available in 1976. Outside of a few exceptions, I stuck within amp sounds, synth sounds, keyboard sounds that were prevalent in 1976. Second one, I thought, okay, maybe we're going to go to 1978, which isn't a big change, but it did open up some of the more advanced analog synths, like what was I starting to use? Probably starting to use like the Juno 106, even though I don't think that came out yet. But some of the later re-release eras of the Rhodes, which is a little more bell sounding you had the bell register up top. So just little things like that. By the time I got to the third one, I wanted to move more towards an AOR FM radio sound, hence the name 99.3 FM. And that was specifically going to be a different way of getting songs. They're all covers, with the exception of one, but I didn't write any of them. The idea being that there were a lot of artists in the 70s that did not write their own music, or they wrote some but not all, and then you would get publishers that would then present songs to these artists by great songwriters, whether we're talking Burt Bacharach or Carol Bayer Sager, Diane Warren, Richard Page. And I wanted to take that approach and say, okay, let me go find songs as though an A&R guy or a publisher is presenting songs to me and saying, which one of these do I want to do? I didn't want the burden of writing songs. I wanted the idea of, let's interpret a song that someone else wrote and make an album of that. So it was a different approach in terms of collecting the songs, but also sonically, I was then going for probably, I'm getting closer to 1980 at this point in terms of sounds that I'm using.
Yeah. Well, the opening track, Did You Mean That? It's got that nice lilting rhythm to it.
That one I did write, and that was sort of meant originally to be a standalone single. It was supposed to sort of bridge the gap while this new album was taking place. But everybody else that was involved said, dude, you got to have that one on the album. Put it first. That everybody loves that song. That's like the hit. Like, well, it's not even on the album yet. I mean, how can it be a hit? But it was turning up on a lot of playlists. And so I opened the album with it. And I think it still fits. So I guess it's me presenting a song to myself. And then there's another one on there called Adrian that Dwayne Harlick, the lead singer on that song, wrote. And again, he presented that to me and said, here, what do you think about doing like a Rock and Toto style song? So it's something similar to their first two records, like a Hold the Line kind of sound.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned like doing different things. The drum intro on Healing Waters is interesting.
Yeah, that's probably moving more into the 80s because I guess a little secret I'll let out of the bag is I'm using specifically Phil Collins drum sounds. There's a library made by Hugh Padgham specifically recreating the main kits that Phil would have used and how he would have recorded them. So that's what I'm using on the bulk of that song. The toms and the intro and all that is all out of the Phil Collins sort of songbook. So I guess I followed that sort of like 80s era Genesis path on that song. That was originally done by Starship, that song. It was written by Martin Page. So another page to add to all the pages. He was a great artist.
Of which there's 99.
Yes. So that was a fun one to do. It's one of those songs that I always heard and said, man, why was this not a hit? And then so I thought, I'm going to do it. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, I'm somebody who seems to gravitate towards songs that should have been a hit. Yeah. I don't know why, but you hear them. It's like, man, this has got, everything to be, a monster, but for whatever reason, it just didn't make it.
Yeah. I don't know if it was ever released. There's just only so much space, I guess, on the radio at the time. There can only be so many songs in play. And so some are just going to get squeezed out. And that was like a deep cut. It's like, I think if there's 10 songs on the album, it's like 7 or 8. So it's fairly well down. And that was CD era. So, people were a lot of times weren't making it to the end of CDs when they were like 70 minutes long, But did you know the original of that one? Had you heard it before? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess that one, the original, was somewhat popular. Anyone that I talked to from Europe all knew that song. Most other people I've talked to, I don't know, Starship did what? They don't think they did anything after Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now.
Yeah. Well, they were always a band that had, album cuts that I always thought, that should have been the single.
Yeah. I agree. Even through the Jefferson Starship, into the Starship era where it was a lot more poppy, I still enjoy those records, even though it was a huge monster hit, not a deep cut like you were referencing, but Sarah, what a song that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Find Your Way Back, I mean, obviously a big hit, but that was I always thought that was an interesting record.
Very, very. That era where they were still a rock band, but Mickey Thomas had just joined. It's like there's all these different. I went through this period where I never liked the Airplane stuff. I was never into the early Airplane stuff. But then you get into it's like there's these 4 album runs or 3 albums, whatever they were, of a certain sound. So you got the era where Grace Slick and Marty Balin were part of the band, and we're talking albums like Earth and Miracles, Red Octopus. I'm trying to work off the top of my head. Spitfire, and that had a particular sound. And then all of a sudden came that next era, which had, like you say, like Find Your Way Back, and then there was Nuclear Furniture that had like No Way Out on it, and that was a hard rock power chord oriented band. And then they dropped the words Jefferson and just became Starship, and it was synths and drum machines and that era. So you had these very specific demarcations of where the band changed.
Yeah.
And I like all of it, for what it is.
Well, there's like Bee Gees, for example. That's what always comes up.
That's a good one.
It's like you've got the camp that loves the 60s stuff.
Yeah.
That despises the 70s stuff.
People that hear the 60s, people that love the 70s and hear that 60s stuff, and they're like, what is this? So it works both ways.
Right. Now they had I believe it was their last album. This is Where I Came In. The title track had really harkened back to their 60s stuff, but with modern production value.
Right.
Which I thought that track should have been a hit.
I thought so too. I remember they did like a live thing that sort of coincided with the release of that album, like a live TV something or other. I remember seeing that. But it's true, I think because I discovered, going back to the Starship thing, and it holds true for the Bee Gees thing, I think because I discovered them all in arrears, as I explained, when I went back and started listening, I wasn't carrying the baggage of saying, this is the band that I knew them to sound like this, and then they changed, and now I'm upset because, I like the old stuff better. I was able to go and listen to it all without that baggage, with a clean slate,
Yeah. Van Morrison's another one where you've got those distinct phases.
Yes.
I love it all.
Yeah.
But, it's obviously, the 60s stuff is different than the 80s and 90s stuff.
Yes.
However, it's all really well done. So it's like, if you like Van Morrison, I don't know how, you can't like all of it.
I get you. I'm not all that versed in Van Morrison, so maybe that's a place I got to go next to find some nuggets.
Yeah. Oh, there's plenty there.
Okay.
So
people talk about him all the time. So
yeah. Well, I'll tell you before we move on.
Sure.
The 99.3 FM, you did a video for Fool. Tell us about that track.
Fool. That's kind of interesting because if you know anything about the lore of yacht rock, particularly the 70s, the one of the jokes is that nearly every song has reference to a fool in it. So whether it's What a Fool Believes or whatever, fool is the buzzword of yacht rock. So because I had started in a yacht rock world, and this record was decidedly moving outside of the yacht rock world, I thought, well, I better keep one toe back in there. So tongue-in-cheek, I came up with this song called Fool that I had always banked in the back of my head. It's from a 2018 release by China Crisis, a band that 90% of people don't know when you say China Crisis, but if you maybe play one song, Wishful Thinking, they're like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that one. But even that song's not representative of what they do.
Right.
But they put out this fabulous record in 2018 called Autumn in the Neighborhood, top to bottom. Great record. If you haven't checked it out, you will love it. Anyway, I wanted to do a cover of that song. And in another life previously, in another alter ego I have called Mr. Radio, which is where my synthy 80s drum machine-y guy lives, I did a cover of another song on that album. And I had to try to get you have to get what's called the mechanical license, which basically means you have to state that you are doing this song so that all the royalties can get properly sent to the right songwriter initially. And there's this Harry Fox agency that is the administrator of all of that. Well, I try to contact or through the database at Harry Fox agency. I can't find the song. And I ask then on the help desk, why can't I find this song? It's because I thought Harry Fox kind of handled every song. And they said, well, if it's self-released, people can choose not to have it as part of the Harry Fox group, or particularly if it's covered by another European song thing. That's when it went ding, 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 because China Crisis is out of England. Well, it wasn't covered by European rights service either, so I couldn't do it there. They self-produced and self-released, so the song didn't exist in any of these networks. So the only way I could get approval to do this was to actually track them down. And I managed to track down Gary Daly's page on Facebook, even though he didn't write Fool, but asked him, hey, this is what I'm doing. Would you be okay with it? Because I know it doesn't fall under any rights agencies. And he said, send me the track. I'd love to hear it. And he wrote back something very gracious, how much he loved it. And he said he'd be proud to have it out like this.
That's cool.
But it took a lot of legwork to actually get that. And I thought, oh, after all of this work, I may not have the legality in my favor to release it. So I got to have a Fool song on a record. Come on.
What are a couple of the unsung heroes of Yacht Rock as far as song? What's a couple of songs that you think should be bigger than what they are from that era?
Well, when you say unsung heroes, the first person we've already talked about I think of is Bill Champlin, because again, outside of music geekdom, people don't know the name Bill Champlin. But I think one of the great songs of that era is off of his solo album that was produced by David Foster, and that is the sort of power ballad called Sarah, that I think is unbelievable. May not be a Yacht Rock song, it's from the era though. And Bill told us that the story behind that was that when that started climbing the charts, he had also at the same time sort of overlapping. Now remember, David Foster was producing Chicago 16. And so now Hard to Say I'm Sorry was climbing the charts. And the label pulled all distribution and promotion of Bill Champlin's song Sarah because they were going to put all their nuts behind Chicago. So he said he had two top 10 songs at the same time because Sarah made it like to number 5 or something like that. But he had that one and Hard to Say I'm Sorry in the top 10 at the same time. But they basically tanked the rest of the album from that point on. So that's one that is unsung. In terms of a yachty track, I think there's some great stuff that Beyond Steal Away from Robbie Dupree, which is really worth hearing. Something like Brooklyn Girls or Saturday Night. These are very yachty sounding songs, very easily accessible. As soon as it gets to the chorus, and you're like, "Oh yeah, man, this is 1978. This is how we wrote hooks back then."
Mm-hmm.
Some of the more obvious stuff, people don't think a lot. I don't think the name Ambrosia comes up all the time until you play them the song. You play How Much I Feel, and they're like, "Oh yeah," Those are the ones that popped ahead. What about you?
One of them, we actually had him on the show. I don't know if you remember, Jim Photoglow had a hit called Fool in Love with You.
See? Fool. I told you.
Exactly. Yeah. And always like that. He's
great.
now, he ended up writing a bunch of monster country hits, and he's been, playing with the Dirt Band for a lot of years now.
Dirt Band?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
And then the other track, I actually had this song stuck in my head the other day.
Okay, go ahead.
Get Used to It by Roger Voudouris.
That's the one I was looking up. I was just trying to look up Roger Voudouris, and I could not come up with the name Get Used to It. Oh, that's hilarious.
That record. The other day, for whatever reason, it was stuck in my head.
Yeah. That keyboard riff, that is so like Michael Omardian, and I know he produced it. Oh,
he co-wrote that.
How is that so funny that we're thinking of the same song?
Yeah.
All the songs.
But Michael co-wrote that with Roger, produced it.
Get used to it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Groovy.
Yeah. Uncanny.
Oh, man. There's a moment. There's a highlight for your show, man.
There you go.
Stuff just doesn't happen normally.
Oh, man. Well, to tell you what, John, we're coming up on our time here. Is there anything that we didn't get to that you want to make sure that we do? Other projects you got going?
Well, working on a new record, haven't exactly figured out. I've sat down with myself on this one, and we're moving further into the AOR direction. Through some of the stuff that we studied on our podcast, I became re-infatuated with the sound of the mid-'80s, Journey, Foreigner, so like Raised on Radio era Journey, Girl Can't Help It, things like that, even back to like Faithfully and things like that, but also like the Foreigner when they got more poppy, that REO Speedwagon to that era. So we're kind of moving into that area. I haven't got it all locked down, but that's what I want to do. I got to get a couple of songs in the bag before I know whether that is going to work the way I hope it will. I want to make sure also that the guys that worked on this stuff, get noticed. We mentioned Russ, and, he's the Michael McDonald of the group. Dwayne Harlick was a latecomer to the group on the first album, but we so desperately needed the power voice. He brings us like the Bobby Kimball kind of sound that we desperately needed, because there's times that Russ and I can sound similar and we don't have that thing at the top. And he's a great guitar player too. Andrea DiPuccio, who I found out of Pisa, Italy, lays down some amazing solos at times. Colton Weatherston, another Detroit composer, musician, great guitar player, helps me out a lot. Those guys have saved me a lot of times, and they do it all out of the love of the music. We all do this out of the love of the music. Nobody is getting rich off of this stuff. The only way we're getting rich is in here, the pride of having done it.
Well, there's something to be said for that.
Of course, people can go out and buy this stuff and help, but we understand that that's not what the music industry is like today, especially for this style. We just want people like you that like this style to appreciate what we're doing. That's it. That's the end game for me.
Well, for me, the litmus test of any new music done in an earlier vein.
Oh,
the test for me is, can I play it in between two songs of the intended era and have it sound like it belongs?
Right.
If it does, then it passes the litmus test. If it doesn't, well, now it's just, the house brand, wannabe version of something else.
Yeah, so stuff that stylizes itself but doesn't really understand the music of the time. They pick a few sounds that they say, oh, that sounds like a Rhodes. That sounds like a drum machine. Yeah, man, it must sound like the right era. But once they put it together, the whole thing sounds like not quite satirizing, but caricature of the 80s, 70s music. Whereas as I explained, my whole process, I still use the process we talked about early on for recording stuff and committing stuff to, quote, tape, even though it's Cubase that I use. And I specifically use instruments and processing and reverbs and things, all of that from the era. I don't use any of the modern tricks that are available to me. That's kind of hard sometimes when you want to, you can do this one thing with that plug-in in an easier way, but I won't do it that way.
Well, a lot of the stuff, I don't know if you remember, but a lot of the Glenn Larson produced TV shows would always have songs that sounded like hit songs.
Interesting.
But they weren't those songs. But they, they had the vibe of them, but it doesn't ring true,
Yeah.
And that's how a lot
it's
of
being paint by numbers. It's kind of, we'll string a few of the cliches together we know. And it's very paint
exactly. It's like, I understand why they did it, because it would be, the budget of the show probably would have quintupled if they would have paid for the rights for the actual songs.
Yeah.
However, unless you are just a passive viewer, or somebody who's not passionate about music, you're just like, okay, whatever. But if you are, you hear it, you're just like, you know what? I don't know.
But it's funny because maybe, they're prescient in a way, because the way that licensing worked out, a lot of these old shows weren't able, the reason you can't find some of the episodes is because of licensing issues. And sometimes it's a song. And I know I read the story about how they had to go back into the first 2 years of WKRP in Cincinnati and change out all of the songs, because originally they would play Van Halen or Queen or something when Johnny would drop the needle. But they didn't have the license for them beyond the first 2 years. So when reruns came along, and certainly syndication many years later, they had to go and swap them out. And that was a difficult job, because they didn't always have multi-tracks available. And they would have to, if somebody's talking over the song, they would have to have somebody come in and impersonate Venus Flytrap talking over his voice just to replace the song.
Yep, exactly. And one of those tracks was Bill's After the Love Is Gone.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Ha! All comes back to Bill. Told you.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, John, anything else you want to make sure we cover here before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. Just look for us. I'd love to say late 2025, but maybe 2026 for the next one. So, but certainly stream the other ones. Share them with your friends. That's the thing. I like what you're doing, playing for other people, because we know that within the tiny niches that we operate, it is a tiny niche. And I think people, even if they don't think they're looking for it, are looking for something musically that has heart in it, has emotion, has story. Not to, old man yelling at the cloud here, about modern music, but there's something that this kind of thing can offer to even younger people today that they aren't getting from other stuff. When I started listening to music, I told you my dad had stuff in the house, so I was listening to Benny Goodman. He had Benny Goodman playing. Stuff way predates my birth. Even Miles Davis or Brubeck, they predate my birth. So I encourage people to listen outside of the tiny window, what is their quote, their era. There's other stuff.
Yep. Well, and then the other part of it too is for people who did, were around to hear this stuff from 70s, 80s, who now, because if they turn on the radio, really don't hear anything for them unless it's the oldies channel, don't realize how much good music there is out there. The difference is radio used to bring it to you. Now you have to go find it.
You do. Yeah, because the playlists of all this old stuff is even on an oldies channel that say is playing Yacht Rock or they're playing songs of the 70s, the playlists are still very, very, they're only going to be the hits that survived. You will never hear an album cut. And there are so many good album cuts on these records that are way better than anything you're going to hear new, in my opinion. So you got to go back and do what you said. You either got to go buy the records, find the records, or if you're a streamer, go and stream an album. Don't just go to, hits of the 70s and hit go. Just because you recognize all the songs. There's a lot of great stuff. Hit Doobie Brothers, Living on the Fault Line. Listen to the whole thing,
Yep. Well, there's a lot of those artists of that era released music later, and some of them are still releasing music that's really good.
Mm-hmm.
However, unless you are a hardcore fan, going to the website, seeing stuff, following them on tour to know that the music's out there. There's no, big budget that's going to compete with Brat or whatever the latest flavor of the month is.
Yeah, you're right. And radio's not announcing that and bringing it to you. Yeah. Talked about Rick Springfield earlier. He did some great records over the last several years. I'm not crazy about his newest one, but some of the stuff before that, like Rocket Science, that I don't know how old that one is. That's a tremendous record. He went to Nashville and cut it with some country guys. It's not really a country record, but you hear the influence. Unbelievable. record, and this is way past time when people stopped paying attention to Rick Springfield, but it's great.
Well, yeah, I've always, believed that, hey, if it's, keeping going with it is the best thing that you can do. But artists who continue to expand, what they're doing. Yeah, Dwight Yoakam's new record. He's got a track on there where he had to have been having so much fun in the studio because he does some really cool stuff, on the track. It's like this guy's 40 years into recording, and he's still keeping it fresh. As opposed to going, okay, you know what? I'm going to do my 30th version of my hit from 19 whatever.
That's good to hear because I have not listened to the new Dwight record. I am a big Dwight fan, and particularly, well, really even through the 90s and stuff, because Pete Anderson was his producer, and Pete Anderson's another Detroit local guy here. But
yes, he is.
He's not working with Pete anymore, I don't think, unless they're back together.
No, actually, this album he produced himself, so...
But I want to hear it because of what you say. I would rather go see somebody live that is, as you say, actively still creating new material than to go see somebody who's just doing a nostalgia tour that they haven't put out anything in 20 years. They're not really creatively active. They're just going out and singing the songs. Even if the playlists aren't different, I just think there's an energy about somebody who's still creating, even if they're old.
Not that Dwight's old.
No, but by comparison to, when he first started doing guitars, Cadillacs, and Hillbilly Women, it's a long time ago.
1986.
I don't know if you realize it. That's a long time ago.
I prefer to not think of it as that long ago.
Yeah, that was like 10 years ago, right?
Yes, that's what it seems like.
Yeah, the 80s were only 10 years ago.
One of the things I always say to keep point of reference, something doesn't seem like it's that long ago. Okay, so Guitars Cadillacs came out 39 years ago, but if you go 39 years prior to that, it's 1927.
Yes,
or 1947. I'm sorry. So
they still, they talk about that you think of the change in music from 1950 to 1985 versus 85 to 2010. It's just, or somebody came to us, somebody on our show said, if I were to give you a song there was a number one song in the 50s, 60s, one from the 70s, one from the 80s, one from the 90s, one from the 2000s, 2010s, and 20s. You'd be able to tell me which one was 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s without any problem. The 2000, 2010, and 2020 songs, you probably would not necessarily be able to get right.
Well, and the thing is, too, moreover, a song from 1950 sounded way different than 1959.
God, you're not kidding.
And you can say the same thing for each of the following decades, because a song from 80 sounds way different than 89. Because by 89, everything was very synth driven, what have you. So the production value and even the songwriting was way different.
Yes.
However, as you said, the difference in sound in the subsequent decades from 2000s on hasn't varied that much.
No, it, I think that it's, other than a few things, I don't think anything truly, truly new happened after 1989. Because even if you get into what was the next big movement was the grunge era, but really that was sort of just a remapping of like the Zeppelin and,
Eric Burdon did grunge in the 60s.
And if you say, well, what about the electronic music scene? Well, I can point to Kraftwerk, in the 70s. Maybe you'd say hip hop, but rap and stuff started in the 80s. It wasn't
70s,
new.
Really, late 70s.
Right. Grandmaster Flash and things like that. That all started then. So you can't, I don't know what's new. What is wholly
bluegrass is the one area I would say has probably seen the growth on it more than any other style over the last 30 years.
Yeah, of course it's not new, but you're right. You know what that tells you right there, that people want to hear stuff where people are actually playing actual instruments, that there's still an infatuation with watching somebody pull off a bluegrass tune, which can be very difficult. And who's the guy that everybody's talking to now? Billy Strings is the one that people bring up a lot. I'm not all that familiar, but we had a guy make that same kind of case that the live music and particularly the bluegrass is sort of the great hope right now.
Yeah, I mean, the musicianship is just astounding.
Yeah.
But they're, going into it. It's not that it's new, because there were bluegrass artists who were, incorporating or, covering non-bluegrass songs in the bluegrass style. However, there's been some real interesting things done musically, in that genre that where it has not stagnated, unlike a lot of other things.
And if you go to see them play, they're playing. You hear them playing. You can tell that they're playing. You can go to a big-time concert now, no matter who the artist is. I don't want to pick on Taylor Swift or anything like that. It doesn't matter who it is now. You're not always sure that you're hearing that you're just hearing the 5 band members on stage play. There's something else going on. Whether we're talking about an old band like Journey or somebody new like Taylor Swift, you're not sure you're really seeing a live performance of musicians. Like halftime shows at the NFL are all pre-recorded, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's really what you're seeing, and people seem to be accepting of that now.
Yes. Which is why we've had the stagnation that we've had for 30 years.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But the bluegrass thing keeps coming up. Yeah.
Because the record labels will put out what the market wants.
Yeah.
And if the market is okay with that, that's all they're going to put out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
who's the producer that I'm trying to think of the old producer, probably worked on he should be top of mind. Big name from the 70s. Anyway, one of his famous quotes was that people don't know what they like what they know. And so you continue to give them stuff what they know. We've talked about some of these musicians and things, whether we're talking a band like Queen or somebody who always breaking boundaries. They were breaking boundaries because they were so artistic and they were so demanding that their material get released. Infamously, Bohemian Rhapsody, they wanted to edit it down and they said absolutely no way. Their stuff, they held firm. And they were able to sort of push back against the record labels to a degree because the artistic desire was so high. They wanted to be different. Nobody wanted to sound. That was the worst thing you could tell somebody. Oh, you sound just like the Eagles, or you sound just like the Beach Boys. You didn't want to hear that. You wanted to be different. And somewhere along the line, that dynamic changed where the desire to artistically break boundaries and not compromise for the sake of the record label died off. And it got to a point where now what you're saying right there is you just continue to feed them the same thing because you can make it a lot cheaper now, and you can always, even if they're only interested in it for 2 weeks, we got something new coming right down the pipe 2 weeks later.
Yep.
It's not new.
In the meantime, those who are different are the ones that last. Sinatra was different. Elvis was different. The Beatles were different.
Right.
As you go through, but look
how much the Beatles
catch
changed in a short time just to be different every year.
Right. Yeah. But when the record label business model is we're making money with artist A, and every other label says, let's go find our artist A.
Right.
And then you wind up with 5 of those same things.
Right.
And then after about a year or two, there's only 2 of them still around. One's still doing the A tier stuff, and the other one's on the B tier tours.
Yes.
Yeah. And that it just rinse, cycle, and repeat all the way through. So
fortunately, we had those artists though that refused to Beatles, Queen, some examples, some of the progressive rock groups that just refused to be into the mold. And somehow we still had, goes back to the radio stations too, that weren't fully governed by the record labels at the time, where you actually had DJs picking songs and you could actually hear them pick a song that, would become a hit that the record label had no interest in. When infamously playing the flip side of the Doobie Brothers tune "Black Water" became a huge hit, not because it was released by the label; it was the B-side.
Right. That's what spurred Chris Isaac's big launch.
What, Wicked Game?
Yep.
Or was that a B-side?
Well, actually, I don't remember if it was a B-side, but it went nowhere. And then I believe it was a DJ in Atlanta started playing it.
No kidding.
And then the buzz built. But, now, the consultants running radio, where radio stations are beholden to consultants.
Yeah.
Saying people, this is what they want to hear. I had a run-in with a consultant with an old syndicated show that I did. It was a country program. Yeah, and the one of the stations that aired it said, "You know what? You should listen. Talk to our consultant, see what he has to say for you." And the first thing he told me, he's like, "I listened to your show. It's really well produced, but you can't play songs about death." And I said, "Okay, well, there was only in the show, the episode that you listened to, there was only one song about death. You can't play that song. Nobody wants to hear that song."
Oh my God.
And I said, that song was He Stopped Loving Her Today. So you're telling me I should not play on a country retrospective show, George Jones. He's like, no, that song doesn't test well.
It doesn't test well. Oh my gosh.
I said, that's all I need to know.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It's interesting how that dynamic has changed. Whether it be the label or the radio, and they've both kind of, the payola thing at the time has been replaced by playlist gatekeepers on Spotify now. It's just your rinse and repeat kind of thing. But, fortunately we had artists that refused and wanted to break out. So we're hoping that there's somebody. People say, well, everything's been done already. You think they thought that in maybe 1970? They thought, everything's been done. I don't know. No great inventor thought everything's been done. So...
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Even if you're not completely reinventing the wheel, if people hear stuff that has a sound that they like, they'll gravitate to it. The catch is, in today's world, breaking through. The upside of the technology is, you can record in your home and put out a record that sounds as good as a record made in a studio years ago. The downside is, everybody who's doing that is now competing for the same space. Right. So, whereas before you used to compete with, hypothetically, 50 other people on major labels, now you're competing with thousands of people to get their ear.
And it costs so much to make a record in 1975, to make a really good record, whether we're talking a Fleetwood Mac record or Asia or something like that made in the 70s. Because there was that much investment, the label probably had to do something to try to recoup some of that. So they always had that motivation that we spent this amount of money, we need to promote to get X back. When you don't spend anything to make the record, the label doesn't spend anything to make the record. Basically, people are making it and sending it to the label and hoping that the label blesses it in some way. They're not spending any money. So why are they interested in promoting it? All they're interested in is, as you said, 2 weeks later, find the next thing that sounds like that. But they don't have a motivation anymore to get behind something and promote it.
It's like anything else. If you don't have skin in the game, you're not gonna follow through with it.
I heard that even new records don't make labels any real money. Even big records like Taylor Swift or Rihanna or Beyonce records don't really make the label much money because the royalties are all on the writer side, and that's all apportioned out. There's 13 people that write every song because you put everybody on it so they can all get a little slice, because that's the only way you can make money off of music. You make very little off the streaming royalties. So the label does not make big money off a Beyonce record. But they're all out using what money they can get, and they're investing in old catalogs. It's the catalog music. It's the Bob Seger catalog or the Van Morrison catalog or the whatever. They're buying these Queen catalog for billions of dollars because that is still what makes the money.
Yep.
Which is amazing. And probably a lot of that's because it's all on playlists. So, you go on and people are overwhelmed by the idea that on Spotify I can listen to practically anything I want. So I don't know, hits of the 80s, So again, you're getting those same songs, but you're guaranteed so many listens because that's the way people listen to music. So they buy up these catalogs.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Amazing stuff.
Absolutely. See, we look how many the music world problems we were able to cover.
We haven't solved them. We've uncovered them. But
Nobody's going to solve them.
No, I don't think so. People asked us that. We had that one guy on that was talking about the bluegrass, and he asked, where do you find hope in the future of music? And I said, I just don't. Oh, and a lot of it's because it's made, now that it's made electronically the way we talked about, that even somebody making a great record, I can still, in the back of my mind, listen to it and say, yeah, but is it real? Mm-hmm. Even a bluegrass record. I said, I know that that's what their intention is, but I still listen to it in the back of my mind saying, yeah, but is it real?
Mm-hmm.
That's a shame.
Yep, absolutely. Well, on that note, John.
That happy note.
I'll tell you, throughout the show, we've had, the Page 99 Bandcamp and YouTube and Facebook up there, so folks can give it a listen and listen to it, purchase it, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I just hope people put it in the same level of the stuff from back then. That's how I want to be judged. Does it fit, to your point? Does it fit? Can you put Doobie Brothers on one side of it and, Robbie Dupree on the other side of it, and with Page 99 in the middle, and does it make sense to you? Does it fit?
Yep.
That's what I want.
Speaking of Dupree, Bill LaBounty, who co-wrote a bunch of his stuff, he's another unsung
that
guy of that era.
Album, self-titled, is a banger. Yes.
Yep. And he wrote a bunch of country hits, too, man. In the 80s and beyond.
No kidding.
Yep.
I didn't know that.
So... But all right, sounds good. Well, John, thank you for taking the time to join us.
All right, Michael, appreciate it very much.
No problem. Everybody, thanks for watching. Have a good night.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.